Everyone says how horrible it will be to renovate or build your house. We're here to say it doesn't have to be that way. Join 3 seasoned architects as they interview homeowners who recently completed a large project and ask them one simple question. What do you know now that you wish you knew before you started? Welcome to Home, the Second Story podcast.
Hi, and welcome to a snack-sized episode of Home, the Second Story. I'm Sherry Scott with Springhouse Architects in Cincinnati, Ohio, along with...
I'm Taylor Davis with TPD Architect in Birmingham, Alabama.
And I'm Marilyn Modinger with Runcible Studios in Lancaster, Pennsylvania and Boston, Massachusetts. What we are talking about today is if you're looking to buy a house, these are things that we would suggest you look for. So we get asked this question a lot. You know, we're house hunting. We even go walking through houses with people. And what are the things that we tell people to look for?
So I'm going to give a caveat and say this first. We are not home inspectors. So the advice that you are getting is not to forego a home inspection because you listened to our podcast. Do not do that. Take it with that large rock of salt. My sister is actually a realtor here in Birmingham. So I go into a lot of houses because I'm nosy and because I like to go look at things. It's total research. And we also go on walkthroughs with clients. I think, you know, there's sort of the base level of what do you need? You know, bedrooms, bathrooms, certain size kitchen, the sorts of things that you know are kind of your checklist for what you want out of that home. So that's sort of set that aside because for most people, they already know what that is. A house description will generally check those boxes. So at a certain point, if you're going to visit a house, you generally have a pretty good sense that it's going to hit that criteria. So I think what we probably want to talk about are what are the other things that you should be looking out for? What are the kinds of things that we tell our clients, hey, let us go take a peek at this because this is something we want to see. And I'll say this again, I am not a home inspector, but a lot of the times the first place I go is the mechanical room or mechanical space. And we go look at the ages of the equipment and the hot water heater. And, you know, it's easy to look and see what the service record on a lot of, there's a sticker generally that shows what the service record is on a lot of that stuff. That's one of the first places we go look. We look at the space and it's beautiful and we check out all the finishes and all that. But if you're going to buy a house, understanding what money you might have to put into that house, either today or in the not too distant future, a big chunk of that not sexy change is mechanical or plumbing or electrical. So that's kind of the first place we tell folks to look. What about y'all?
Well, I'll add a quick thing to the electrical just before we, to look at the electrical size of the service. So in Massachusetts now, the code requires all sorts of things. Basically, the whole house has to be electric, basically. So if you're doing modifications to the house above a certain size and whatever, insert more information here. But the point is that a lot of services are too small in older homes. So they're 100 amp. And for these major renovations, we're needing 400 amp services. So usually it's 100 amp, 200 amp, 400 amp. I've not done a house above 400, but that would be the standard. So we're looking to see, does it at least have 200 amps? And is there room in the panel? So is there room to add additional stuff in the panel?
First of all, I need people to know what they need and what that particular house does not have that they need versus what it doesn't have that they want, right? Needs versus wants. Like, okay, we're going to look at this 3-bedroom house. You absolutely have to have 4 bedrooms. That's one thing. It's another thing to say, I want a huge kitchen with a big pantry. That may be a want. So we go head in knowing what absolutely has to happen. A lot of times when I go through, people are doing like considering a major remodel. Like this house is not even close to what they want, but it's where they want to be and the land is beautiful or something's drawing them to it. So, the nuts and bolts stuff that I start with is if it's on a septic system, can the land handle an addition to the septic system, or can the septic system handle another bedroom? Here, I don't know if it's the same where you guys are, but here it's based on number of bedrooms, the size.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that, and the other thing I think we run into every single time is there room for a pool? If you're doing addition, is there still room for a pool? Just keep that in mind, because that seems to be, ever since COVID, that seems to be like the number one question for people.
I can say, working in an urban environment, I've never once had that question.
Yeah. On the rooftop. Come on.
That would be fun.
There's your next project.
Yeah. Taylor said she goes to mechanical room first. I definitely do that too. I would say number 2, my second stop is the basement, because I want to see the structure. I want to see, just give it the old once over. Like, I'm looking at the joists. Do they look like they're in good shape?
And the sniff test. Are you smelling anything down there?
Yep. Dead serious, right? Like, you go down there, you give it a good sniff, and you see, like, are you detecting mold, moisture, water? Does it smell musty? Is it like normal basement musty, or is it like
sewer gas? Or
yeah. And then looking at the joists. So in a lot of older homes that we work on in the Boston area, the joists are actually undersized. So if you're going to do a major renovation, you have to replace the entire floor system. So we're looking at, are those joists, are they in good shape? Have they been chewed up by every single DIY plumber for the last 50 years and cutting out pieces of the joists? So that's what we're looking for. The other thing that comes up a lot, and this is in houses of any age, and whether urban, suburban, rural, whatever, is in the basement that's unfinished. A lot of people say, well, I want to buy a house that, you know, the basement is nice so that that's good enough that I could refinish it someday. Great. That's a great idea. One of the major things to look for is, where does the sewer line exit the building? Because if the sewer line is above the slab, then you can usually see it. It's right there in front of you. If it's above the slab, that means that if you're going to put a bathroom in the basement, you need a grinder pump to pump the sewage up into the sewer. So it's not like the biggest deal in the world, but it is a whole thing that you got to do. And having a grinder pump, there's a smell sometimes. There's there's just additional hassle that you have to deal with. So
one more thing that could go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you're looking at a renovation and you're trying to finish the basement, go down and look at where that sewer line's coming out.
On the other end is the attic space, to know if it's rafters or trusses, and to see if you can add. A lot of people want to add a whole second floor that has to do with the foundation. So just to, like you said, Marilyn, we're not engineers, and we're not solving all of the problems by looking, but just knowing, are you rafters or trusses, and which way are they going, tells you a lot right off the bat.
And what's possible. And I think that's one of the reasons why folks ask an architect to come with them, is to help them evaluate, like you said, Sherry, what's feasible. I think one of the things that it's generally pretty easy to do yourself, although we do it mostly for people, is to do a quick take on what the zoning is for that property. Because that's going to tell you a lot about what's feasible. If you walk into a house and you're like, oh, I can just add on to the back because the next door neighbors did that. Well, you don't know when that happened, and your setbacks may have changed, and there are certain, so in general, and I'll start from the beginning. In most areas where there are authorities having jurisdiction, I would say probably there are some restrictions as to how much you can build on a piece of property. And sometimes that property is huge and there are still restrictions on it. So you have certain setbacks, or what we call them, from the property lines. You can't build in most places all the way to the property line. And there are different districts that allow for different setbacks. So you may have to be 40 feet in the front, 15 feet on the sides, 30 feet in the back, whatever that is. That information is actually readily available to you a lot of the time. It's free for us to look it up, but you can also call your local building department, your zoning department. They will be able to tell you what the setbacks are. A lot of times it's online. You can look up the address and find out what that is. But that's an important piece of information to have if you're considering an addition to your property. And sometimes even if you are considering like outdoor space, so the amount of space that can be hardscape as opposed to having to be permeable and it can be drained, is an important distinction. And lots of jurisdictions have very strict restrictions about stormwater runoff, which is really what that's about, to make sure that the storm sewer systems aren't overflowed. So they want to make sure that there's enough ground that can absorb rain during a storm so that you don't get flooding in other places. So those those kinds of numbers and restrictions are part of the property. They come embedded with the property. So in order to not have to abide by those, you have to get a legal ruling called a variance. And that's a much longer process. And lots of people do it, and there's nothing wrong with it. But those numbers will, to a certain extent, dictate what's possible for you on that property.
Yeah, I want to underline that like 400 times, because also so zoning, I've worked with many clients over the years who have said, I'm going to say it, that their realtor told them they could finish the attic, or their realtor told them they could add on. Yeah. And I do a cursory zoning analysis for 10 minutes and I find out that they cannot, because even though Taylor just said you can get a variance, you can't always. And in many jurisdictions, of like, if they say these are the setbacks, or this is a permeable area, or this is the amount of volume of built house on the site,
right,
and you want to do more than that, you have to prove a hardship. Like, you can't just say, I want to.
I want a TV on the third floor.
Or whatever. Like, you have to prove, and you basically can't prove that. So I also want to say too, that it's about what the motivation of the person giving you the advice is. The realtor, and there's so many great ones, so I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus at all. But that person's job is to help you through the transaction of buying or selling a home. They aren't actually zoning experts. So just like I'm not an expert in helping someone through the transaction of buying and selling a home, like that's not my expertise. My expertise is zoning. So that means that also, if you look things up, or if your realtor does, or somebody who's not trained, you might think you can do something, but you actually can't. So case in point, was just on a project. It's like a 3-acre lot with a house on it. Plenty of room. But there's a little line in zoning that says if you disturb more than 800 square feet of land, you have to go through this really complicated engineering process. So technically you could put a big addition, or you could do a guest house, or you could do this and this and this, but that means it's an additional year's worth of engineering and like going through the process. It doesn't mean you can't, it just means that you have to understand that. So I just want to, I know talked about zoning, we can move on, I guess, but like just underlying that a lot. Even the smallest things, moving a window in Cambridge or Boston or Somerville, you can't do a lot of that stuff without zoning.
And I'll underline that because it's different for every jurisdiction. So it's really important not to go by what your friend did in the next town over, or what somebody did that you know next lot over. It is really important to have that conversation so that you are definitive about what the various parameters are that you can build with in that particular piece of property. Because like you just said, it varies all over the country and within a town, lot to lot, street to street. You just need to make sure that you're checking that property that you're interested in.
There's something else that goes with that actually impacts property values too, that the average homeowner might not realize. So zoning is by the jurisdiction. So like by your town or by the city. Like it's not by the state, it's by your smallest sort of jurisdiction. That is changing all the time. So for example, Cambridge in Massachusetts just got a new zoning about a year ago or so. That meant that leading up to that, as it became clearer and clearer that it was going to pass, that impacted property values, and it impacted who was buying what and what you wanted to buy and what you didn't want to buy, because of how that zoning was going to impact what you could and couldn't do on a property. Having someone, even as a realtor, who understands like, hey, they're about to pass a new zoning ordinance, we should do a little bit more due diligence to make sure that, why is this house such a steal? Because maybe the new zoning ordinance is going to make it impossible for you to do anything.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of an outlier case, but it just happened in Cambridge. So I think it is worth sort of knowing some of that.
Another layer of that is an HOA. Make sure that you know HOA, historic, any of those additional layers can add a lot of heartbreak if you don't find it early enough.
Yeah.
There's two pieces of that I think are important. It's one thing to sort of look at an HOA handbook and see all of the rules and restrictions that are associated with it and kind of throw up your hands. There's also a lot of room for a creative architect or designer to come in and find things that satisfy what you want within those restrictions. I mean, that's what we're really good at, is finding ways to be creative within certain sets of parameters. So while it's important to know that stuff, if it's like the perfect neighborhood or the perfect lot or whatever that is, don't necessarily give up. That's when you do talk to an architect or a creative professional who can help you see kind of, well, this is what it says, and here's some ways that still satisfy the qualifications, or here's a way we can do that's historically correct, that meets all of your needs and is something lovely that you love. And so you don't necessarily need to throw up your hands. That's really the time to bring in the professional before you buy it and say, who might have done 10 other houses in that neighborhood.
Yeah. And you can get it under contract and then negotiate the contingencies. So you can have it under contract and have it wrapped up, but then have a contingency as to what you want to do. And then you have some time to hire your architect, walk them through, give them some time to either come up with some ideas or do their investigations.
I will say that you can't do that in the Boston market because it moves too fast. So I will just, there are markets where there is no contingency time period or due diligence.
Sure.
Anything. You just have to go for it. And that's why having that person with you from the beginning could be the right move if you're in that type of market. Yeah. If you're not, and if you're in the market that, like Sherry, that you were just describing, that's so helpful and so great.
For sure.
To like be able to say, like, because there's a pressure, like, hurry, 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 hurry. And you shouldn't feel pressured to the point where you're unsure about major things like that.
Right.
And I think that especially if you're in a market where that's the case, then, you know, I think being able to do that is important. I'd also say that, you know, in terms of like choosing whether to buy a home, you know, there's things that are really hard to put words to. So I'll just call it vibes. Like when you walk into a place, like, does it feel like you? Does it? And I don't mean the colors. We can change the paint. I don't mean the weird tile in the bathroom. We can change that. But does this feel like the kind of place where you can imagine holiday dinners and kids coming home or whatever? Like, does this feel right? And that is really, that's different for everybody. And that's also like sort of the memory of the house. Like maybe there was a family that lived there for a few generations and they're selling it because whatever. But that vibe matters a lot. It matters how you feel in the space, and, you know, and how it kind of just strikes you. That's important.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. I think that's a big part of it. I'll add to one more thing. Having an understanding of construction costs, if you are walking into a property with the intention of renovating or putting an addition to it, understanding what actual construction costs really are will help you ascertain whether or not what you are paying for the house aligns with your investment goals. Because if you walk into a property and you have an unrealistic expectation of what it's going to take to make that what you want, and you are spending too much on the house, you're going to come out kind of disappointed and probably a little bit angry. So that's another scenario where talking to a contractor, talking to your architect, getting that information prior to going through the purchasing process is a really helpful back pocket information thing to have. Because like I said, having realistic expectations about what something is really going to cost can make or break a sale.
That's right. And it can't be coming from the realtor.
Nope.
You know, it has to be coming from an independent person who does that work all the time and who's not, doesn't have a vested interest in the sale going through.
Yep.
Right. So I think that's important. You know, there are also things that you cannot change about a house. Absolutely cannot change. One of them is its location. Like, is this a part of town you want to be in?
Right.
You know, is this the neighborhood you want to be in? Is this, like, you can't really change that. You're buying that neighborhood, you're buying that location. So you can knock down the house and start from scratch if zoning allows. But you can't change like where the lot is or where the parcel is. So I think that's important. And then in the situation where you're not knocking down the house or starting from scratch or whatever the case may be, things like, where's the sun where are there trees, where are your neighbors, like things that you kind of can't really control. Like you can't control where your neighbor's house is. You can't control like, oh, they have a pool and it's right next to your property line and you're going to be like listening to their kids screaming all the time. Like, or maybe that's fun and you have kids and it's going to be great and you'll pile in, or maybe you're like, that's the last thing I want to hear. So make sure that you're looking beyond, like, who are the neighbors? Where are there trees that's on, like, if there's beautiful trees, I've had this happen where there were gorgeous trees and turns out the trees were on the neighbor's property. The neighbor took the trees down and the owner couldn't do anything about it because they were on the neighbor's property. So things like that, and where the sun is, you know, are you on a northern slope, which is going to be cold and no direct light? Are you on a southern slope, which will be really hot? Like, these are all things that that you should be looking at too, that are really either impossible to change or really, really, really hard to change.
Yeah, I guess my main piece of advice is for people to keep an open mind for the structure. There's a lot that can be done. There's a lot of things we can change. We can change all of the materials, right? We can, you can change the size. You can change the room layout. If you find a house that you like the location of, you like how it looks outside, maybe we just change around all the rooms inside. That's possible too. There are just so many ways to change an existing house into something that you'd love. Just keep an open mind, and maybe, especially if you're not finding the right house for you and your family, maybe do reach out to a professional and see if you could take it down a notch and leave some room in your budget to, you know, buy a less expensive house, but do some more major renovations. It's actually pretty satisfying to do that work.
Yeah. And then that can reflect exactly what you want, you know, and isn't whatever someone else decided to do right before they quickly sold it. Right. Like, they're quick fixes at the end. So I think that's important too. But at the end of the day, you know, I think it's really great to go through this process, and it's just about having the right people around you to advise you.
Yep.
Thanks for joining us today on Home the Second Story for a quick snack. Questions for us or topics you'd like us to cover, or are you interested in being a guest? Reach out at admin@htsspodcast.com. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Home, the Second Story podcast. Feel free to share this episode with a friend. Contact information for all three of our architects are in our show notes. And don't miss future episodes. Follow or subscribe to our show for free in Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening right now.